Hi everyone, welcome to 24/7 Football and welcome to today's show of Lives in the Game, a series where we speak to various people from around football. Last week we had Gareth Seddon. This week I thought we'd go down a different route, speaking to a journalist who can tell you how to get into journalism and things like that. So we've got Ian Cheeseman. Ian, thank you very much for coming on the show. How are you today, okay?
Yeah, very good, thanks.
Oh, this must be a dream for you, 24/7 Football.
Here, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is one of the highlights. I mean, there have been many highlights, working in Las Vegas with Ricky Hatton and stuff, and this one just about takes it.
So we're going to be talking to you, Ian, about your career, obviously future ambitions, so we'll get straight into it. So you're a huge Man City fan like myself, and you do work for Man City now, which we will get to. Do you actually remember the first game that you went to?
Very clearly, the first game, and it's ironic because there is an anniversary that lends itself perfectly to my first game coming up very soon. The first game I attended was on the 15th of April 1970, and it was City against Schalke in the European Cup Winners' Cup semi-final second leg. City won 5-1, Colin Bell scored, Neil Young scored, and I was 10 years of age, so you can work out how old I am, and I'm getting on a bit now. And I went along. I'd been wanting to go, and my mum had been very protective and wouldn't let me go, and the opportunity came. She's actually German, and she came from the town where Schalke are from. And
so you got a one-up on her there.
So she had a family member who was coming over, and so I got the chance to go to the game. And of course in February, well, the home game's actually in March, City play Schalke again for the first time at home since that first game. So yes, we've gone around quite a circle to get to that point.
Yeah, definitely. So we'll get on to the highs and the lows you've seen as a Man City fan. But you are now a professional journalist, and you have been for around 25 years. But is it true that you started out working in a bank?
Yeah, I worked in a bank. When I left school, I didn't have an awful lot of confidence, didn't believe I could do anything really with my life. So I just got what at that time was perceived as a safe, steady, secure job for life. With the qualifications that I had. I dropped out of university because my mum had actually died during my university time, so it became sort of difficult for me to carry on. So I ended up just going in with A-levels and O-levels, as they were back then, and worked in a bank, which I found very unfulfilling, if I'm being honest. And it wasn't what I was good at, but you had to take what you had to take. Fortunately, at that time, I met my wife, which was something I'm very grateful for. Still very happily married. And I started then to work in, well, whilst I work, I was a volunteer at hospital radio because my wife was from Oldham. I'm not from Oldham originally, but she was from Oldham. And I found out that in Oldham there was a hospital radio service that was very well known called Radio Cavell, named after the famous nurse called Edith Cavell or Edith Cavell, and that was an opportunity for me, and I was very quiet, I was very shy. I'd admired people I'd heard on the radio, people like Fred Eyre, who I went on to work with, and I thought, well, in my own naive little way, that I could go along and do something like he did on the hospital radio. But of course it's very different. Most of what they do is about playing requests for people in hospital, which I understand. So it wasn't in the type of work that I'm doing now, but I spent 10 years presenting a weekly programme on hospital radio as a volunteer on a Sunday morning, so it didn't interfere with my football attending, and tried all sorts of things out. I experimented, just like you do as a student, no doubt, of trying to do different types of interviews with different types of people, everything from political stuff to more frivolous stuff, flying in a plane, running the London Marathon while I was interviewing people, all sorts of stuff really. And it was fun, and it helped me to develop, not because I had a plan to work full-time, particularly in the media, but it did. So when the chance came to work in the media full-time, I already had sort of 10 years of experience behind me, which I think stood me in good stead.
Yeah, definitely. I think the volunteering path that you mentioned is essential for anyone who's coming through, and I will ultimately get onto that further down the show. But was it a big leap of faith for you to go from your steady job to go to the BBC Radio Manchester? And I know it's paid off now, but just how big of a leap of faith was that?
Huge. I mean, I had in theory, secure job for life. I know that banking's changed since then, but I had a cheap mortgage, and there were lots of advantages to working in a bank. The problem with going to the BBC, because that was where I went, was that I was offered a 1-year contract, and it wasn't to do my dream job, which is to cover City and be involved in City. It was to work in the sports team, and I didn't know if I could do it. I didn't know if it'd work, and it could easily have been that after a year they said, it's not really worked out, thank you, goodbye.
Yes.
And where would that have left me? So it was a huge leap of faith. And the other thing is, I'm an absolutely obsessed City fan. And at that point, when I was offered the job at the BBC, I'd gone 20 years practically home and away without missing a game, without missing a single game, home and away. Now, I don't say that really I'm not claiming I'm a better City fan, bigger City, I don't mean that, but what I mean is I was a committed, die-hard, obsessive, and I knew that by taking this opportunity at the BBC, I might have to give that up, and I may have to stop. But somebody who I trusted very much so said, if you don't try, you'll never know if you could have done it.
Yeah.
And because the ultimate goal for me was to commentate and to report on my club that I support, Manchester City, I had to know if it had happened, if it would work. So I took that leap of faith, but it was dangerous, and it's easy in hindsight to looking back and say, well, it worked, but I didn't know if it would.
So you took the job, you went into BBC Radio Manchester, and you found yourself being the main reporter and commentator for the Manchester City games as well. Was that a bit of a dream come true for any football fan? I know there'll be fans watching this who aren't necessarily liking that of Manchester City, but that must have been a dream job for any football fan to commentate on their own team.
Yeah, if you're not a City fan, then it's not a tribal thing. I mean, if you're a United fan, if you're a Bury fan, if you're a Sale rugby fan, it doesn't matter what you are. If you're a fan of something, and I've just read on Twitter, Ricky Gervais, who I'm a big fan of, somebody said to him, it was a question about how rich he was. And he's a very subtle, funny man, Ricky Gervais, in my opinion. And he answered in a way that I got straight away. And he was advising somebody young and she said, how do I become rich like you? And his answer was, do a job that you love. And I've just tweeted back to him, actually. Not that he'll take any notice of it, but I did tweet back.
You're a big deal. You're a big deal.
But I tweeted back and said, I've been lucky that for the last 30 years, I've done a job that makes me feel rich. I said, I'm not wealthy, but I feel rich because I'm doing a job that I absolutely love and have loved. So if you can achieve that in your life, whether it be you or the person watching this, that I think the quality of your life in terms of doing the things that you really love are huge. And when I worked for the BBC, believe it or not, I was actually offered at one stage by the head of sport the opportunity to be the Manchester United reporter. And that would have been, for me, a massive step forward in my career. And there have been people who've done that job, people like Roger Johnson, who now presents on North West Tonight, Mike Sadler, who went and worked at Granada Television, and other people like that who have bettered their careers. I mean, you've only got to look at Dan Walker now, who presents Football Focus.
He's huge now.
And huge. He was on the commercial station, pretty much doing the same sorts of things that I've done. So there are massive opportunities out there, but I chose to not do that, to limit myself. And throughout my career, rightly or wrongly, I've chosen to go down a path which is a very narrow, focused path, which hasn't been given me lots of opportunities because I've been, I think the word is obsessed, but passionate about Manchester City. So everything I've done, every decision I've made, every career path I've chosen has been very, very central and focused. I wouldn't recommend that to everybody else. I would say leave your options open, because there has only been at times there's only been one or two jobs that have even existed that I wanted to do. Well, wow, that really narrows your opportunities down, doesn't it?
I mean, were you lucky in that aspect?
Very, very lucky.
Very lucky, yeah.
I've worked very, very hard. I don't think it's down particularly to talent. I don't think I'm any more talented than anybody else, you and other people, and I mean that really sincerely. I don't think I'm anything special, but I work really hard and always have worked really hard, and have been very self-aware and very self-critical of things that I've done.
Yeah.
And I've been very determined, but in the end of the day, I've also been very, very lucky.
Luck does come into it, but you've worked very hard, and throughout this journey, you've met a lot of people, including a lot of City players. What has it been like to meet your idols? And have you ever been a bit starstruck? Is there anyone that sticks out where you've met them and you've been a little bit starstruck when you've met those players?
Well, Colin Bell was my boyhood hero, and I
Yes.
ended up writing his book, which was a bit surreal really, because I'd met him a couple of times, and in those early days of hospital radio, I went to meet him at the Bell Waldron, a restaurant that he had in Whitefield, and when I walked in, you know, I was a little bit starstruck, and the first time I met Colin, as I remember it, was I must have been probably about 13 or 14, and it was at a charity cricket game, and I remember sitting there with a bit of paper, my hands were shaking to get him to sign it. So to think that all those years later, I ended up actually going to his house every week for 3 years, going to meet his sister, and where he grew up at Blackhall Rocks, and in County Durham, Heselden, his birth town and everything. To think that I was with him one-to-one, doing all that, and by then the starstruck bit had gone, because I was older and I was more experienced, but to think that I did all that was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean,
that is incredible, isn't it? That is incredible.
If I said to my son now, who's 23, in another 20 years you'll be writing Sergio Aguero's autobiography, he'd go, no way, that's not happening. But if you'd said that to me when I was 23, one day you'll write Colin Bell's and I'd go, no.
Yeah.
But it happened. So, you know, you can dream, and it can happen. And I mean, I wasn't an author, I'd never written a book, and so to actually be stupid enough, brave enough to actually have a go at this, and it wasn't without setbacks and resets and all sorts of things, you know, is again down to a bit of luck, a little bit of talent, I hope, you know, and a lot of help from other people, you know, and I'm very, very sort of, you know, I feel very blessed that I've had these opportunities. In terms of when I meet people now, if it wouldn't matter who walked into this room, and I certainly don't mean it in an arrogant way, but if I don't know, Trump walked in here or something like that, I mean, I know he polarises views, but that's not the point really. If he walked in here now, I wouldn't go, Donald Trump's here, the president. I'd just go, you're all right, because that's how I am now with whoever I meet, because I've been so used to it over the years. I mean, in my own personal life, in terms of my heroes, I've been very, very lucky because I've met all my heroes. Now, I know it's not cool to say this, but I'm an ABBA fan, for example. Right?
Everyone loves a bit of ABBA.
Well, I've met all 4 members of ABBA, and I've actually interviewed. I've actually interviewed the 2 guys. So if you're going to get starstruck, then it's those types of levels of heroes. When I grew up, they were landing on the moon. I met Buzz Aldrin, you know, who was one of the 2 men who, and I can't deny I was a little bit nervous when I met him, but generally, because in the industry I've worked in for 30 years, it becomes more commonplace. I can't deny that starstruckness left me quite a while ago. That doesn't mean to say I don't admire people, and I do, but I've now come to, which is an obvious conclusion to come to, we're all the same. You're no different to Buzz Aldrin. Nice to meet you, by the way.
I mean, Buzz Aldrin's probably got a bit on me. I think everyone who works in this industry will go through what you have gone through in terms of not getting starstruck. I'm still yet to go through it, so when I meet Vincent Kompany, I probably still will drop to the floor. But after that, maybe I'll calm down a little bit.
I've got his captain's armband from 2012.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, he's my absolute idol. But you actually got on to the question that I was going to ask you, which was the Colin Bell autobiography. Arguably, well, he probably is the greatest player to ever play for the club. David Silva's creeping up, but how did that come about?
Well, it was a strange one, really. It came about because the BBC was sponsoring the Commonwealth Games baton relay. You know, they carried the torch around for the Olympics, and they had an electronic baton that went round the Commonwealth, I suppose, ahead of the Commonwealth Games. And I was told that I could have an opportunity to actually carry the baton myself for 400 metres or whatever the lengths were that you did it for, which was a thrill, an absolute thrill and an honour for me personally. And I said, could I ask anybody else? And they said, if you want to nominate somebody, you can nominate somebody as well. So I rang up Colin, who I'd had contact with through meeting him at supporters clubs and stuff like that, and that interview back in the hospital radio days, and said, would you like to carry the Queen's baton in this relay? And he was quite sort of struck down by that and said, oh, I'd love to, you know. But knowing from here what I knew at that time about him, being sort of modest, understated, not wanting to have publicity, I thought he'd be forgotten.
Yeah.
And he was. So my offer was taken up by him, but he sort of smelled a rat really, and he said to me, you know, does this mean I've got to do an interview, and does this mean I'm going to be, you know, on TV? Because I don't want any of that. And I said, if you don't want that, Colin, it won't happen. I'll make sure it doesn't happen. So he trusted me. He went, he carried the baton. He carried it in Droylsden, I think it was. Did his 400 metres. He wore the same uniform as everybody else. The public and the press didn't pick up on it, so it was never reported. His name may have been in the list somewhere, but that's about all really. Whereas other celebrities were completely reported. So he got his wish to do it in a modest, understated way. So he rang me up and said that he was really pleased that I'd kept my word. So I'd been mithering him at that time to do a sit-down radio interview with him through his family. I used to present a programme called In the Spotlight, where I'd talk to somebody for 40 minutes or so, like you're doing with me, on radio. And I said, well, if you're that grateful, because he kept saying how grateful he was, I said, why don't you do that interview with me, one-to-one? And he said, oh, no, I don't want to do that, I said, no problem, you don't want to do it, it's not, you know, it's not a problem for me. And then I said, I don't know why it came into my head, a bit like when I got the company's captain's armband, and I just asked him on the spot when I was with him, while he was wearing it, could I have it? I don't know, I hadn't pre-planned that, it just came out of my mouth at the moment. So I said to Colin Bell, well, if you ever write a book, because he hadn't a book, I'll write it for you. And he just said, well, I'm thinking of writing a book, how serious are you?
So you just threw it out there?
What? And I just tried to keep cool, keep that, you know, don't sort of say, well, I don't know if I can and all. I just went, yeah, well, if you want, I'll do it if you want. And then when the conversation
you were trying
ended,
to play it cool.
When the conversation ended, I just thought, can I do this? Is he serious? Is this going to happen? A little bit of time went by. We had a few discussions with him, and eventually I wrote it.
Wow.
You know, so it sounds very... I started writing that book as a biography, and the difference between a biography and an autobiography, and I don't mean this in a patronising way, but is basically a biography is me telling his story, perhaps carrying quotes of other people. But because he's such a modest character, him saying, yes, I was great, and in that game I did this, and it wasn't his character, he can't do that, he wouldn't do that. Anyway, that was the way I started to write it. I went and interviewed all his former teammates, ex-players that had played against him, and wrote it. And when I wrote it, I went to Fred Eyre, one of my heroes really, he's written A Million Seller. And so he said, I'll read it for you, and a couple of other people read it, and they said, in that style, it's quite hard to read because you flipping from one quote to another, and then it's back to you, and then it's why have you thought about, you know? And he didn't at first say this, but eventually he said to me, have you thought about doing it in the first person in Colin's words? And at one point I sat with Colin and said, I don't think I can do this, and I actually gave up. And my father-in-law was really ill, and turns out was dying at the time, and it became too much for me. But Colin, to his credit, said, I'm not letting you give up, you are going to do this book, and you do what you need to do with your father-in-law and come back to me when it's all over, which I did. And then I said, well, why don't we do it in the first person? So I then wrote the whole book again, as if he was saying it all. Some of it, a little bit of it, I was guessing what he'd say. But you know what, I read it all out to him when I'd finished. He sat there, and he's a very quiet person who doesn't generally show his emotions. And there were tears rolling down his face when I read it to him. And at the end of it, he said, that's perfect, that's exactly how I would have written it had I had the skills.
Wow.
He did say to me, though, there is one thing you've missed out, and I thought, oh no. And he said, I really like Sudoku, you know, the word.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah. And he said, can you put that in somewhere? I said, yeah.
he reads the whole thing. Not you've missed out this goal or this goal. I really like Sudoku.
So I put it in. But the little nice story that comes from that was that the original hardback version, of course, Colin had a lot of time in hospital with operations to his knee, and his son has become a surgeon. And while he was training, his son gave a copy of the hardback book to his boss, who's also a surgeon. And his surgeon boss read it, and if you've got to read the book to know this, but Colin's mum died when he was very young, but the only thing Colin knew about it was growth of the back body. That was how he described it. And the surgeon read that and said, you do know that's bowel cancer, don't you? And Colin said no, and he said, yeah, it's bowel. That's what they referred to, bowel cancer.
Wow.
So he said, so you do know it's hereditary as well, don't you? And Colin said no, and he said, why don't you get yourself checked out? They immediately checked him out, and he was diagnosed with pre-cancer in his bowel. So they immediately dealt with it and got rid of it, and he's still here. So I'd like to think.
You saved Colin Bell.
Well, I won't go that far, but I maybe played a little part in him still being around.
It's crazy how like stuff like that happens. That's a great story about Colin Bell, because for someone who was so good at the game to be so modest as well, what a character. And the fact that I love that story about the Sudoku, just you've got to get that in. But would you say that was probably the biggest highlight of what you've done so far? Was that your most memorable?
Certainly one of them. I mean, I've written my own book called Best Job in the World. I wrote a bit of Rodney Marsh's book, Loose Cannon. He wanted me to write the whole thing, but I didn't have the time at that moment, and he wanted it quick, so I wrote the city part of it. Yeah. And other contributors did his bit in the jungle and his bit in America and his bit in London and everything. But I contributed a part of that as well, which I'm very proud of. But I did a radio documentary when City won the league in 2012, an hour-long documentary, a City fan and a United fan telling the story of that season and that final game from their perspective, which I'm so proud of. Yeah. I won the North West Sports Journalist of the Year that year, which I guess that was part of. I've sat down and interviewed 90, 100 big name sports stars from the North West. That I'm very, very proud of that. Commentating on key moments like the Aguero goal and City's first FA Cup win since '69. Just so many different moments. I'm proud of them all. It's very difficult to single one out.
Yeah, definitely. So you very much, like you've just mentioned, you've very much seen the ups and the downs at Manchester City. Did you ever in your wildest dreams think the club would be where it is now, and how proud of you to have been there, working with the club while it's gone on that journey?
Absolutely. I suspect that certainly in journalism, I'm probably unique. I think I'm the only person who's been in journalism. Chris Bailey, who works for the club, certainly was there for a big chunk of it. But I would think that I'm probably the only specialist journalist, if you like, who's been there right from playing in the third division, as it was, to where City are now, and in fact before that as well. So in that way, perhaps I'm quite unique. You can't be quite unique. You're either unique or you're not. So I'm unique. Yeah. And as a fan, I mean, there are other fans who are equally obsessive to me. I know several of them, and there are fans who've been to more games than I've been to, and it isn't a competition anyway. But you know, I've attended over 2,200 City games now, not including Youth Cup, reserves, women's games, just first team competitive games. That's quite a journey. That's quite a journey. Yeah,
that is that is something. So
losing 4-1 at Lincoln, beating United at Wembley in the semi-final of the FA Cup, and everything in between. Semi-final of the Champions League. You know, going out to Mansfield Town in the Auto Windscreen Shield in front of 3,007 or whatever the crowd was.
You know, I've got to talk about it. The Aguero goal. Was that one of the best moments of your career to commentate on?
Well, I knew it was going to be a big moment, and you know, so I sort of thought, do I need to prepare something? Do I need to have something in my head? about what I'm going to say, and I thought I don't want to tempt fate. I went along to that QPR game knowing that a win obviously would make City champions.
Yep.
So I had a couple of ideas in my mind, but of course it didn't quite go to script. City took the lead, then went all square, and then 2-1 down, and I actually thought this is going to be a nightmare because the BBC had asked me to be on the breakfast show the next day for 3 hours to talk about whatever the outcome was.
Imagine.
And if City hadn't won the league, I'd have had to sit there going, typical City, you know, always the bride, you know.
Yeah.
And I would have had to done that, and it would have been horrendous. When every other fan wants to hide under a rock, I would have had to have been out there talking about it. But the drama changed when Edin Dzeko got the equaliser to make it 2-2. I actually thought at that moment it wouldn't make any difference. It was too little, too late. Yeah. And then when the ball hit the back of the net, obviously the most euphoric moment as a City fan, as a commentator, everything in one little moment came to a head. But of course, at that moment, my co-commentator, Nigel Gleghorn, went berserk, connected to everything, pulled all the equipment on the floor, and we went off air in that split second. And so
Brilliant.
During the 45 seconds, because that's how long we were off air, that I was putting all the bits back together, everybody else is cheering deliriously and having orgasms and whatever they're having, and I'm actually putting everything back thinking, I hope this is going to work.
So basically there was some people who listened to BBC Radio Manchester that didn't know Manchester City had won the league.
No, they knew they'd scored because we went off air. It was a big day, not only for City, but potentially for United, of course, who could have won the league, and also Bolton Wanderers, who were in our patch, who were on the verge of relegation, and QPR were their relegation rivals. So it was a real cacophony, really, of different things. And so I was really proud that on air I'd told the audience that United's game at Sunderland had finished and they'd won 1-0. I'd told them that Bolton had been relegated because they'd drawn at Stoke. And then the ball went in the back of the net, and although I didn't do Aguero, you know, like Martin Tyler did, I'd said my bit, and they knew the ball had gone in the back of the net, and they knew City were 3-2 up. And that was when we went off air. So the people at the other end were saying, City are leading 3-2, it's not over yet, and we will be back there as soon as possible. I didn't hear this until afterwards, of course, and then I'm putting it all back together again, and we go back on air, and I go, I'm back, and then there was another minute or so before the final whistle went. So we did all that, and I interviewed all the players on the pitch. I was on the open-top bus, and
that is a dream.
I was lucky enough to be on the open-top bus interviewing people, and I came away with the ultimate souvenir, which is captain's armband from Vincent that day. So that can never be beaten.
How hard was it to stay professional as well?
Well, I stayed professional.
That was the only goal where I've cried as well.
I stayed professional, remember? It was Nigel Gleghorn that went unprofessional, and that's why we went off air. So I don't swear. I'm never tempted to swear on air or anything like that, which is what people think you might. So I just did what I needed to do. I conveyed the energy, but always within the back of my mind, the bigger picture. So I was very mindful of how it affected Bolton, how it affected United. And if United had won the league, I would have been professional in the way I would have described that. So I did. How I do it, I don't know, but I did stay detached enough, even in that moment. But Nigel Gleghorn didn't.
Nigel, it's your fault, mate. It's your fault. If there are any people out here who are watching and they're thinking, how would they get into sports journalism? Not necessarily at Man City. What would your advice be to them?
It's a tough one because it's so competitive out there, and these days
it's saturated, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it used to be that if you knew people, you know, you could get sort of a favour, or you know, if you knew somebody who worked for a professional organisation or knew their parent or whatever, whether this is right or wrong is for you to judge. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but you could sort of go, can you just have a word, and can I come and shadow you and do this, that, and the other, and that might be a way in. Now you've got to get the qualifications to even have a chance. You've got to somehow get experience doing things like you're doing, so that you can put it on your CV and demonstrate to potential employers that you've had a go at this and that you have something that they can look at, making show reels, writing, whatever. Obviously we're in a world now where, quite rightly, females who before weren't given as many opportunities in this industry are now treated equally, which doubles the amount of competition you've got. You know, it's tough. It is, and I think that the jobs are reducing in numbers. I think less organisations now, budgets are being tightened all the time.
Yeah.
So to get into this industry is tougher than it's ever been before. And there are probably more university places of people studying this than there ever were in the past as well. And I've actually gone and done lectures and talked to students, which I'm always willing to do. And I've had 30 students in a room, and I've been talking to them about you know, how they can better themselves. And then I've said, you do realise that there's 30 of you in this room. Be lucky if one of you makes it. You know, the other 29 are your competitors.
Yeah.
And even then, there's no guarantee that one of you will even make it. And they look at me and think,
yeah, like, why are you being harsh?
But I'm telling you the truth.
Yeah, realistic.
That's how it is. I mean, to be honest with you now, since I've left the BBC, you know, I've had to go it alone. And I've been lucky because, you know, people know who I am, or at least some people do.
Yeah.
So I've got a chance to try to go it alone with the YouTube channel, with the podcast that I do. But I'm struggling. I'm finding it difficult in this modern world to make a profit, to make a living, because so many people do what I do now as a hobby.
Yeah.
So they have a normal job, and you know, and then they go and do what I do: blogging, vlogging, video, whatever, YouTube channel. But that isn't their income. And because I've spent 30 years as a professional doing this, I'm trying to continue to make a living.
Yeah.
And it's very, very difficult. So you've got to have your eyes open. You've got to work hard. You've got to be lucky, and just hope that you can do it. I mean, I launched a podcast a couple of weeks ago as we sit here. I launched a YouTube channel 18 months ago.
Yeah, we will put them in the link below as well. So if you want to go and check out Ian's stuff, that will be in the description below.
Thank you.
I'm
at the moment I'm working on my own because I can't afford to employ anybody, because I don't make enough money out of it, and I'm very scared about the future. Although I have a tie-up with City at the moment for this season, I don't know if that's going to continue.
Yeah.
I hope it does, because I love working for the club. But whether it does is beyond my control.
Yeah.
And I'm always looking for help. So if there's anybody watching this now who thinks, well, you know, I'd love to be involved. You know, I'd love to have somebody who come along and help me. And it can be mutually beneficial, because they hopefully can gain some experience from me, and ultimately, you know, it might help them in the future with I can't promise anything, but you know, a bit like me working 10 years for hospital radio, it can't do you any harm. So, you know, reach out to me. I'm on Twitter. My mails are open at Ian Cheeseman. You'll find me on social media through Facebook and whatnot. You know, contacting me is not that difficult. And if
I can vouch for that one. One thing I didn't expect is when we messaged you that you'd be just so open to doing this as well. And I think it's very important, if anyone is watching, that Ian is huge in terms of journalism in the Northwest. So if someone did choose to work with you, no doubt you'd help them with contacts and stuff like that.
Try my best.
Exactly. So if anyone is watching that wants to get into the media industry and wants to give Ian a hand, you don't necessarily have to be a Man City fan. Someone who wants to help him out with his camera work and stuff like that. I think you'd be very good.
You don't know where it can lead to, but I'm certainly not going to make any promises about anything. And I understand how difficult it is juggling things. But if there's anybody who fancies contacting me, then do it.
Right, Ian, we've spoken through your career. Last question is, you have done a lot, and we've spoke about your YouTube, but is there anything else that you still want to achieve?
My favourite part of the job has always been commentary. If another opportunity came up to commentate on City, or to go back on radio again, because currently I'm not on radio, to talk about City or football in general, or Northwest football, then I'd love to do that. My fear is that my time might be coming towards an end, because people now might perceive me as being too old, too bald, too fat, whatever. So I wonder whether my time is you know, might be coming to an end. I hope not, because I have a massive passion for what I do. So the truth is, I don't know what my future is. As I stand here at the moment, beyond this summer, I have no idea what my future is. So let's see, I was far more secure when I worked for 23 years for the BBC and had a salary coming in. Now I'm in that big wide world of commercialism and sponsorship, and I mean, I've even done some work as a videographer for other companies that are nothing to do with sport and football, you know, and I'm working with a guy at the moment trying to grow his social media. So there are other things that I have little toes in, and you know, that might have to be the direction I go in the future.
Fantastic. Ian, thank you very much for speaking to us today. Thank you for everyone watching the video as well. Subscribe to the channel. You should definitely subscribe, shouldn't you, Ian, to 24/7 Football?
Well, I'll look at it now, that's for sure.
Fantastic. But yeah, thank you very much for coming on. All of Ian's YouTube channels and podcasts will be in the link in the description. Ian, again, it's been an absolute pleasure. Catch you all again next time, guys, and we'll see you next time.